Improving your aim in Destiny 2 can be a very frustrating experience for any player. Whether it's finding the right sensitivity or just having an inconsistent shot overall, it's no secret if you want to be successful in PvP, having good aim is a must. If you're tired of being frustrated and looking to improve your aim, and as a result your performance in the Crucible, then this video is for you. Today I'm going to cover tips that will help you improve your aim no matter what input device or weapon you use. These tips will also focus on how to directly improve your aim without the use of an aim trainer and focus more on techniques you can practice and refine while playing Destiny. These tips will show you techniques that the top players in Destiny 2 use to be consistently accurate, as well as help you build mechanical skills to improve your aim. Now let's get into the video, and if you find these tips helpful, consider dropping a like as it helps support the channel. To get things started, I'm going to focus your attention on something every good aimer knows, and that's the height you see on screen. This is the standard height of character models in Destiny 2, and this is where you want your crosshair to naturally rest. Reason for that is this will naturally have your crosshair already at the same level as the chest and head of your enemy's character model. This can help save precious seconds that you would normally have to spend readjusting your crosshair to line up with the enemy's head, and make it more likely that you will kill your enemy first. This basic principle is called crosshair placement, and it's all about reducing the amount of distance you need to move your crosshair to intersect with the enemy's head. Most players aren't thinking about the placement of their crosshair and will often find themselves aiming more towards the ground as they move around a map. This results in wasting precious seconds spent readjusting their crosshair once they run into an enemy and putting a lot of reliance on your reflexes and ability to flick accurately to a target. This tip is even more important as you turn to clear a corner or slide out from cover, as it ensures that you're giving yourself the best shot of winning the gunfight. Another helpful technique is not focusing solely on your crosshair for tracking enemies, but instead using your crosshair as more of a reference point and focusing more on your target. What you're doing is looking past your crosshair and more focusing on the target you are tracking. This can be made even easier if you utilize crosshair placement along with a technique where you look around in-game, lining up your crosshair with whatever your eyes are focused on, which is called screen centering. You want to be lining up your crosshair with whatever you're focused on in-game versus always keeping your crosshairs in the same place while using your eyes to look around to the left or right of your screen. Think of it as using your hands and crosshair to look around versus having your eyes looking at different areas of the screen away from your crosshair. These tips may feel super unnatural for some of you, but if it's something you consciously focus on working on day by day, then you'll quickly find your aim improving dramatically. Before moving on to our next tip, I wanted to briefly highlight my Discord community where you can link up with other Destiny players, show off your favorite roles, Guardian fashion, and ask questions. Consider joining using the link below. This next tip is something a lot of players underestimate, and that's the impact recoil control has on your aim. PC players deal with this a little bit less than consoles, but strong recoil control is going to be equally important on both platforms. A good place to start when controlling recoil is understanding the recoil patterns of different weapons when you start to use them. You can do this by jumping into a private match and emptying the magazine of the weapon against a wall without doing anything to try and control the recoil of the weapon. The pattern of bullets you see on the wall is the natural recoil direction of the weapon you are using. This can give you a base understanding that a weapon has a tendency to pull more to the left or the right, and so you can try to compensate for that when in an engagement. This method can be helpful initially, but you may find it difficult in the heat of battle to remember the exact recoil direction of a specific weapon. Instead, what I found to be a best practice is to have a consistent downward pull on your mouse or thumbstick at all times while you're firing. This will help you to get used to constantly controlling the recoil while simultaneously helping you keep your reticle centered. For hand cannons or any precision type weapon, this technique is a little easier to maintain compared to something like an auto rifle that requires more tracking and constant adjustment of your recoil. Along with that, you also want to focus on mastering specific set of weapons that you plan on using the most. Now I know in a game like Destiny with so many awesome weapons with different perks, this can sound counterintuitive. But if you're here watching this video, you're trying to improve your aim, which means making some sacrifices. I recommend choosing the 2 or 3 weapons you enjoy using the most. Focus on improving your aim using only those weapons. This allows you to build your muscle memory around the ADS speed, overall handling, and most importantly, recoil direction of the weapons you're using, and make controlling the recoil second nature. I would recommend doing this for a couple of weeks to really give yourself a chance to see some real progress in your ability to aim effectively. Because like building any skill, it's going to take time to see that improvement. So while practicing, try not to focus too much on the recoil itself, as this may actually make your aim worse as you are mentally too focused on the recoil itself instead of focusing on your target and letting your brain and muscle memory do the rest. If you enjoyed the video so far, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any future tip videos like this one. The number one thing most people start with when trying to fix their aim is their sensitivity. For your sensitivity in Destiny, it's all about finding the sweet spot between maintaining consistent aim while aiming down sights and being able to track and look around and do an easy 180 equally as effective when in hipfire mode. What I found is people will either make their sense so low that they struggle to track their enemies when they jump or make sudden movements, or so fast that when they're ADSing, they struggle to control their aim. This is why I found that most people benefit from lowering their sense, since they often enjoy the freedom to be able to look around and acquire targets so quickly, but then struggle to keep the reticle on that target in a fight. In terms of where to start with your sense, this is where it can be helpful to use top players or content creators in Destiny 2 as a reference point to experiment with your own sensitivity. For this, I recommend checking out my buddy Rick's article on blueberry.gg. That goes over not only some of the top player sensitivity settings, but also the hardware they use, including myself. Link is in the description. In this article, you'll see that most top players have an eDPI, which is your DPI multiplied by your in-game sensitivity, between 3200 and 4000. For those of you who may be too lazy to check out that article, my DPI on my mouse is 400 and my in-game sense is 9, with an ADS sense modifier of 0.9, which brings my eDPI to 3600. What I originally started at before changing to my current settings was 800 DPI and 5 sensitivity, which landed me at 4000 eDPI. What I found was that my ability to look around and acquire targets felt very smooth, but my tracking while ADSing and my ability to consistently land headshots was lacking. By slowly lowering my sensitivity and experimenting with different settings in each play session, I was able to land on the current settings that I use today, where my aim is much more consistent and my movement and ability to look around still feels great. Experimenting with different sensitivities can be frustrating at times, but remember to be patient with yourself and give yourself time to adjust. Especially if you're going from a very high sensitivity to a low sense, it may take a little longer for you to adjust and rebuild that muscle memory you once had. But for those of you making smaller adjustments, you'll find your brain can adjust much quicker than you even realize. In Destiny 2, finding your perfect sensitivity is not going to be enough to become an aiming god if you're an easy target to kill, and this is where movement comes into the equation. It's important that we are doing everything we can to make ourselves harder to kill and not put so much pressure on our aiming ability. Because at the end of the day, even the best players miss shots, but if their movement and positioning are on point, then these missed shots won't cost them the fight. This starts with the idea of always playing near cover, and more specifically using a technique called peak shotting. Peak shotting is the practice of weaving in and out of cover in between the shots of your weapon. This is where the idea of mastering certain weapons becomes even more critical, because the better you understand the exact amount of time between shots in your weapon, the better the timing of your peak shot can be. Peak shotting benefits our aim in two ways. One, it should result in us taking less direct damage, which means in a game like Destiny, you're getting flinched a lot less and removing one variable that could be impacting your aim. Secondly, it gives us a second as we dip behind cover to recenter our reticle to have a better lined up shot when peeking back out at our enemy, and thus increasing the likelihood of our shots becoming more accurate each time we peek out of cover. Peak shotting is the #1 technique I rely on to not only help steady my aim, but also give me an easy way out if I start losing a fight, since I'm already playing so close to cover. Keep in mind with peak shotting, it's all about rhythm and timing when you peek out with the shots of your weapon. Practice peak shotting by jumping into a rumble match and focus on always playing near cover. By doing this, you'll be setting yourself up to peak shot in more engagements, and you'll also find yourself dying less as well. Keeping with the theme of making ourselves harder to kill, and that's where sliding comes in. Sliding should be used as much as possible as you move around a map, and especially when moving between two pieces of cover. This will help you avoid getting randomly headshot from across the map by a sniper, or the enemy team getting easy chip damage on you and immediately putting you at a disadvantage. But even more important than this, sliding is critical when engaging an enemy from cover. There is a huge difference between bot walking around a corner or sliding out a corner to engage your enemy. By sliding out from cover, you're making yourself harder to track since you're moving faster, and if your enemy isn't centering their reticle as we discussed earlier, you are forcing them to take extra seconds adjusting their aim to your slide. These two movement tips really tie together, because now if I'm going to engage an enemy, I'm either sliding out from cover as we just discussed, or I'm playing near my cover and focusing on peak shotting. I recommend using the peak shotting technique if you're playing more stationary and waiting for your enemy. If you're being the aggressor in the engagement, that's where I recommend sliding out from cover to take the fight always. And just like practicing peak shotting, this sliding out technique is something I also recommend practicing in the Rumble playlist to help you refine your skills in a mode that's typically a little less chaotic than a mode like Control. If you implement these techniques effectively into your game, you'll not only find yourself being more accurate, but also increasing your KD as well. Now, the one thing that we have to talk about that can disrupt your ability to control your recoil and ruin your aim, and is probably a part of the reason you're struggling with your aim in general, and that is how you aim under pressure. A huge aspect of being able to control your recoil, peak shot, and slide out of cover effectively all relies on your ability to stay calm during a fight. In other games, you'll often hear top players say the best way to improve is to quote-unquote take fights. This is partly because it forces you to practice aiming and other movements, but also helps you get used to fighting enemies and being in high pressure situations, and when you're in more high pressure situations, you will over time be affected by them less. The same holds true here in Destiny. If you're playing super passive and trying to avoid engagements, then you're probably going to be tenser when you eventually do get into a fight, and thus will be harder for you to implement the tips we talked about here today. When you are stressed or tense during an engagement, all your mechanical skill becomes less precise and your movement less fluid. Focus on taking more fights, but even more important than that, focus on staying calm in your engagements and trying to relax. You'll find that by doing these two things together over time, engagements become less intense for you, and eventually you'll have this quiet calmness about you in any engagement because you learn how to stay relaxed and focus on the engagement at hand. So take time to warm up and jump into your gaming session knowing you're going to be consciously focused on taking more engagements, implementing some of the tips we discussed today. Because at the end of the day, if you aren't able to relax, you'll never reach your true aiming potential. Remember, no one starts out with good aim, and your aim is only improved by making conscious decisions to focus on improving different aspects of our game over time. As you practice, remember that everyone starts somewhere on their journey to improve their aim, and progress, whether slow or fast, is still progress. So as long as you can reflect and say you've progressed, then that's something to be proud of. If you've enjoyed this video, consider checking out my video on how to become a top 1% warlock at the top, or my video on how insane axiom bolts are at the bottom.